The Great Food Game, Why China Wants to Lock Down Its Food Security. A few days ago, Xi Jinping made a tour of northeastern China. In Changchun, the capital of Jilin province, the Chinese president gave a speech to local officials, stressing the importance of food security, an increasingly strategic importance for the dragon, because it is on food that both the future of the entire nation and the lives of the country's more than 1.4 billion inhabitants depend. Xi cited various concepts, implying that Beijing must promote a diversified and technologically advanced food supply system. The reason is simple. On the one hand, the dragon cannot afford to run out of food. On the other hand, it cannot, or rather does not want, to continue to rely too much on food imports, especially if they come from rival or potentially rival countries. So here is that the Chinese Communist Party has adopted 3 countermeasures. The first, China is strengthening, thanks to technology and science, its internal agricultural system to guarantee indigenous food sources. The second, the Asian giant has made significant agreements with developing countries or the global south, happy to sell their many food products to Beijing in exchange for hard cash. The third, in parallel, the Chinese government is trying to limit food dependence on its rivals, starting with the United States. Food security objective. China is one of the most active nations on the food security front. We are talking, after all, about a nation that has a painful history of famine behind it, and that has to feed almost 20% of the world's population with less than 9% of its arable land. But what exactly is meant by food safety? According to the 1996 World Food Summit, food security is divided into 4 dimensions. The physical availability of food, which concerns supply and is determined by the level of food production, the amount of stocks available, and net trade. Economic and physical access to food, which must be consolidated with policies that improve incomes and control citizens' spending, the use of food, and the stability over time of these 3 dimensions. However, stability is now being challenged by factors such as wars, international tensions, pandemics, and climate change. The first alarm bell in the corridors of Zhongnanhai went off with the outbreak of the conflict in Ukraine. In fact, until a few years ago, the United States and Ukraine were among China's main food importers, a systemic rival and one overwhelmed by missiles and bombs. In 2021, for example, Beijing imported 70% of its corn from Washington and 30% from Kiev. Today, therefore, Beijing's goal is to free itself from dangerous external strategic food dependencies. Xi's plan. Beijing's Ministry of Agriculture predicts that within the next decade, China will produce 91.5% of the food consumed. The plan has already been put down in black and white. The Chinese government plans to achieve 92% self-sufficiency in basic grains and beans by 2033, compared to 84% recorded in the 2021 to 2023 period. In line with Xi's goal of transforming the People's Republic of China into an agricultural powerhouse by mid-century. In the decade to 2033, moreover, the Ministry of Agriculture assumes a 75% reduction in corn imports to 6.8 million tons and a 60% decrease for wheat to 4.85 million tons. For soybeans, the most important item in the agricultural import account, Beijing expects a 21% reduction to 78.7 million tons within a decade. Where are we? In 2024, China imported 157.5 million tons of grain, practically the same amount recorded in 2021 and 2023. Furthermore, according to a paper by the China Macroeconomy Forum, in 2020 China was a net exporter of wheat, producing 99% of the rice consumed and 94% of the corn, but only 17% of the soybeans it needed. Soybeans are primarily used to feed livestock and played a major role in the trade war with the United States during Donald Trump's first term. So let's go back to Xi's trip to northeastern China, where the 3 provinces Heilongjiang, Jilin, and Liaoning are located, which, together with Inner Mongolia, produce a quarter of the country's total grain stocks. The Chinese leader's message is clear: Beijing must armor its food security as soon as possible. Putin said, "God asked me to defend Russia." Talks between Washington and Moscow are proceeding, as are preparations for the face-to-face meeting between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov explains that a possible summit could involve extensive discussions on global issues, not just the war in Ukraine. The question is whether to start moving towards normalization of relations between the 2 countries. find ways to resolve the most acute and potentially very dangerous situations, including Ukraine says. Efforts to organize the meeting, however, are at an early stage, and Ryabkov specifies that the most intense preparatory work will be needed. The Kremlin, however, calls the dialogue between two truly remarkable presidents promising, and it is important that nothing stands in the way of the implementation of their political will. According to Putin, God has given him and the army the mission of defending his country. Fate wanted it that way, and so did God. Defending Russia, a mission as difficult as it is honorable, has been placed on my shoulders and yours, together. He emphasizes during a military honors ceremony on the occasion of the Day of the Defenders of the Fatherland, and on the eve of the 3rd anniversary of the invasion of Ukraine. In his opinion, soldiers who fight at the risk of their lives and with courage resolutely defend their homeland, national interests, and the future of the nation. Meanwhile, another round of talks between Washington and Moscow will be held next week, this time at the level of political directors. We are open to contacts with the United States, especially on the topics that agitate our bilateral relations, Ryabkov points out. We expect real progress during the meeting to be held at the end of this week, he says, explaining that the meeting will be between the heads of departments of the respective foreign ministries. While on February 18th, the first face-to-face meeting between the two delegations was held in Riyadh, with the participation of the number one of diplomacy, Sergei Lavrov and Marco Rubio. Trump, meanwhile, seems to be toning down criticism of Kiev and false accusations of having started the war, while insisting that Zelensky and former U.S. President Joe Biden should have done more to come to terms with Putin. Russia attacked, but they shouldn't have let him attack, he stresses, noting that he is negotiating with Putin and Zelensky. Speaking once again about the war, he reiterates, I think that thing will end. It has to stop.